Hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. And this lecture is all about CloudFormation. So let's get started. Now CloudFormation, it's a service that allows you to manage, configure and provision your AWS infrastructure as code. And resources, or the resources that you're going to provision, are defined using a CloudFormation template, and that is the code element. And CloudFormation, it takes that template, it interprets it and makes the appropriate API calls in order to create the resources that you have defined in the template. And the template supports either YAML or JSON. So you can use either YAML or JSON, whichever you're comfortable with, to create your CloudFormation templates. So what are some of the benefits of CloudFormation? Well, firstly, it allows you to provision your infrastructure in a really consistent way. So it's the same every single time. There's fewer mistakes because there's less opportunity for human error. It takes less time and effort than it would if you were to configure things manually. You can also version control and peer review your templates. And it's free to use, however, you will be charged for any resources that you create. It can be used to manage updates to existing CloudFormation platforms, and it can also handle dependencies between different resources to ensure that resources are created in the correct order. And it can also be used to really quickly and easily roll back and delete the entire stack that you've created within CloudFormation as well. So it's really easy to clear up environments that were temporary or that just being used to test something. You can really quickly have CloudFormation roll back and delete the whole lot for you as well. So let's look at the CloudFormation template in a little bit more detail. So once again, you can use either YAML or JSON to describe the end state of the infrastructure you are either provisioning or changing. Once you've created the template, you upload it to CloudFormation using S3. So within the CloudFormation console, you actually upload it and it ends up in an S3 bucket. And then CloudFormation accesses the template within the S3 bucket. It reads the template and then it makes the appropriate API calls on your behalf to create the resources for you. And the resulting resources are referred to as a stack, and it's called a CloudFormation stack. So let's have a look at an example CloudFormation template. And most of these options or parameters are optional. It's only really the resources section that we'll see in the next slide that is mandatory. So everything else that you can see on this page is optional. So first of all, we have the template format version, and the only supported version is 2010-0909, and that just refers to the version of the template format. So the acceptable or the supported template format for the CloudFormation template. Moving on, we have the description, and of course this is optional, so you can just add in a description of your choice, something meaningful to you. So in this case, it's just describing this as a template to create an EC2 instance. Next is metadata, and that is simply data about data. Once again, it's completely optional, so you can just put in a custom field. And for this one, we're just providing some data about the specific instances that this CloudFormation template is going to provision. So it just gives a description of web server instance. Moving down to parameters. So these are input values that you actually input to CloudFormation when you actually go ahead and launch a stack using this template. So this is information that you need to provide when you go ahead and launch this stack. And in this case, we're defining some environment and environment type, and the allowed values are either prod or test. So we need to provide that when we actually go ahead and launch a stack using this template. And then the next parameter is conditions, and we can use this, and we can use conditions. Once again, it's completely user defined, and we can actually use this to test a condition and take action based on the outcome of testing that condition. So in this case, we are evaluating the parameter env type, which was declared in the previous section under the parameters section. So we're evaluating that, and we're saying if it equals to prod, then we should create prod resources only. So you can use it to tell CloudFormation to make decisions based on parameters that you have input at launch time. So moving on to mappings, and we can use mappings to set our own user-defined values. So for example, we could set the value of an AMI based on a region. So we can completely define this ourselves. So for example, for EU West 1, that is the AMI we're going to use. And you could define a different AMI for every different region. You could define a different AMI for a different environment, etc., etc. It's all very flexible and completely user-defined. The next section, called transform, this is quite important because this allows you to actually include snippets of code which are outside the main template. Now you can either include, for example, code for a Lambda function. You could include your own code that you want to reuse. There's also a lot of code snippets which AWS provides, and I'm just going to show you the web page where you can find these. So I'm just going to search for CloudFormation snippets. And there's a whole load of different example scenarios that you can use to allow you to declare various different CloudFormation template parts. So for example, there's template snippets for DynamoDB, for EC2, Elastic Container Service, RDS, Route 53, etc., etc. Loads, there's all sorts of different resources that they have provided example code for. So for example, if we take a look at the DynamoDB one, it's got an example piece of code for creating a DynamoDB table, the various different properties and attributes, global secondary indexes, provision throughput, etc. All the different things you need to define for a DynamoDB table. And this example here is in JSON, but they also show you it in YAML as well. So you can actually create reusable pieces of code which you can store in S3, and CloudFormation will allow you to actually reference that within your CloudFormation template. So once again, it just allows you to reuse code, maintain consistency throughout your code base. Then moving on to the resources section. So this section of the file is the most important, and this is where you define the AWS resources that you want CloudFormation to deploy for you. So in this case, we're going to be deploying an EC2 instance. We're defining the instance type as a T2 micro, and we're also specifying which AMI we want to use as well. And finally, the last section of this example template is the output section. And again, this is completely user-defined. And in this particular template, it gets you to output the instance ID of the EC2 instance that we are provisioning. And the outputs, you can see them displayed on the console, and they can also be input into another CloudFormation stack as well. And you don't need to know the template off by heart. It's unlikely that they're going to ask you really detailed questions about it in the exam. But it's important to understand, okay, what is the anatomy of a CloudFormation template, what all the different sections are used for, and remember that the resources section is the most important section, and it's the only mandatory section of the template. And also remember that the transform section, that is what is used to reference additional code stored in S3. It allows for code reuse. For example, you can specify Lambda code and also template snippets or reusable pieces of CloudFormation code. So let's take a look at some of our exam tips for CloudFormation. So CloudFormation allows you to manage, configure and provision AWS infrastructure as code. And remember, we use either YAML or JSON for the CloudFormation template file. And remember the main sections of the CloudFormation template. So we have parameters, which allows you to input custom values. And in the example, we use an environment type. So in that example, CloudFormation will expect you to state which environment the resources are going to be for example, production or test. Conditions are used to make decisions based on a set of parameters. For example, it will allow you to provision resources based on environment if you've used an environment parameter. The resources section, remember that's the mandatory section and defines all the AWS resources to create. And that could be an S3 bucket, EC2 instances, an RDS database, DynamoDB database, pretty much anything that you can think of within AWS. you can create as a resource using CloudFormation. Mappings allow you to create custom mappings, for example, mapping a different AMI to a different region. So depending on which region you are working in, you can tell CloudFormation to use a specific AMI for that region. And finally, transforms. So this allows you to reference code located in S3, for example, Lambda code or reusable snippets of CloudFormation code, and both of those located in S3. However, the best way to learn CloudFormation is definitely to start using it and get your hands dirty with it. And that is exactly what we're going to be doing in the next lecture. So the next lecture is going to be a lab. So if you have time, please join me in the next lecture. Thank you. Hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. And this lecture is going to be a CloudFormation lab. And we're going to make our very first CloudFormation stack. So let's get started. So here I am in the AWS console. And you'll find CloudFormation under Management Tools. So it's not under Compute, it's actually under Management Tools because that's exactly what it is. So we use it to deploy and manage resources using templates. So click on CloudFormation. And the first thing we're going to do is just click on Create New Stack. And here it's asking you to select a template. Now you can either create a new template on the fly using Design a Template, but we are going to use a template that I've already created. They also do have sample templates here, and you can play around with some of the sample templates that they have as well. So for example, you can create a WordPress blog, LAMP stack or Ruby on Rails, etc. So there's a few different sample templates that you can have a play around with. But we're going to use a template that I've already created. And you can either specify an Amazon S3 template URL if you have one already uploaded to S3. If not, you can just click on Choose File and you can select a file from your local machine. So I've already created this CloudFormation template here. And I'm just going to walk you through the template and show you exactly what we're creating here. So here is my template, and it's a really simple template, and all it's going to do is create an EC2 instance and enable us to SSH onto that new instance as well. So first of all, we have the template format version, and it's always going to be 2010-0909 because that is the only supported template format version. Next, we have our description, and the description is that it's just a template to create an EC2 instance and enable SSH. Then moving on to parameters, and we're defining a parameter called key name, and it's going to be the name of an SSH key pair that I have located on my system to enable me to log into my EC2 instance. So it's got a type, and it's also got a constraint description to remind us to provide the name of an existing SSH key pair. So remember, parameters is used for inputting parameters into CloudFormation when we launch the stack. Then the next section, the most important section, is resources. So this section defines the resources that we are asking CloudFormation to create for us. And the first resource is called My EC2 Instance. Its type is AWS EC2 Instance. Under properties, we have an instance type, which is going to be T2 micro. Then image ID, and this is the AMI, the Amazon Machine Image, that we're going to use to launch the instance, so the operating system. And this line is really important because this is the AWS Linux 2 AMI, which is located in EU West 1. Now, if you remember, AMIs, they are region specific. And if I try to access this AMI from a different region, if I try and launch this CloudFormation stack in a different region, if I launch it in US East 1, for example, it isn't going to work. So what you need to do is replace this AMI ID with another AMI available in your region. And I'm just going to show you how to find one of those. So come back to your console, click on Services, and go to EC2. I'm just going to open it in a new tab. If you click on Launch Instance and make sure you're in the region that like a region that you want to work in. So for example, if you're working in US East, you can just select the region and then copy the AMI ID. So just copy that and then place that into your file. So that will just make sure that you launch your instance in the correct region and you are using the correct AMI ID for your region. Otherwise, it will not work. So that's the only thing that you need to change in this file. Just make sure you update that AMI ID with a valid Linux 2 AMI for the region in which you are working. Then this next line, key name, it's actually referencing the key name that we created up here, which is our key name parameter. So it's telling CloudFormation to associate this SSH key pair with our new instance to allow us to SSH into the instance. We can also apply tags here. I've just created a user-defined tag of name, and the value is going to be my CF instance. And then the next resource we're creating is going to be a brand new security group. And this security group is going to enable SSH access via port 22. It's going to have one ingress rule, allowing TCP traffic on port 22 from an IP range of 0.0.0.0/0. So in other words, enabling SSH to the entire world to this instance. And then the last section of the file is going to be outputs. And in this case, I'm asking CloudFormation to output the instance ID of the new EC2 instance that we have created. So that is the really simple CloudFormation template. And once you have updated your AMI ID, then we are ready to continue. So come back to the console, back to the CloudFormation console. And I'm just going to check up here and make sure that I'm in the correct region. So I need to be in EU Ireland, which is EU West 1 to match my AMI. And now I'm going to select choose file, and it's going to be my CloudFormation template.yaml. Click on next. And we need to give a name to our stack. So just give your stack a name. And we need to select our SSH key pair, and it's coming up under parameters. So remember, that was our parameters section of our file. So I'm going to select a key pair that I know that I have on my system, and it should only show you the key pairs that are available for the region for which you are working. And just click next. We don't need to add any more options in here, but just come down to the advanced section. And I just want to show you down here that we have this rollback on failure feature. And this defines whether the stack is rolled back if part of the stack creation fails. So you have a choice, and by default it's set to yes. So this means if something goes wrong with the CloudFormation provisioning, then it will automatically roll back the whole thing. So for example, if there's a problem with your YAML template and CloudFormation cannot deploy the infrastructure or the resources that you have specified in the way that you've specified them, then it will automatically roll back. However, you have the opportunity to set it to no. So you can set it to no if, for example, you wanted to debug a CloudFormation stack that was constantly failing. You might want to set it to no to try and understand what is actually going wrong here. And if you were doing this from the API, for example, there's a disable rollback flag that you would use, but from within the console, you can just disable rollback, just basically toggling this radio button. But we're just going to keep that to the default because hopefully this isn't going to fail. We're going to click on next and then click create. And it can take a few minutes for it to actually go ahead and create this. Sometimes it can take about 3 or 4 minutes. So I'm going to pause the video now and come back to this when it is complete. So that has now completed, and if your status has not updated, you can just hit the refresh button here. And I'm going to click on my stack. And down here we can see all the events associated with the CloudFormation tasks. We can also view the template that we uploaded. We can look at any parameters, so that's the parameter that we provided. And we can also look at outputs as well. So this was right at the end of the template where we asked CloudFormation to give us an output, and the output is the instance ID, and there is the value. So let's go to our EC2 dashboard and see if we can find our new instance. So come to EC2, and there is our instance. So it's running. There is the name of our instance, my CF instance. If we look down here at the properties of the instance, you should have the key pair name that you specified, and you can view the inbound rules as well of the security group. You should have port 22 for everyone. So it looks like it's successfully created everything for us. So it's created our EC2 instance using that key pair name, and it has also given us port 22 in the associated security group. So that should be everything that we need to actually go ahead and log into our new instance. So first of all, I'm just going to copy the public IP, and I'm going to move to my terminal window, and now I'm just going to try and SSH into that instance. So I'm going to run SSH -I, the name of my key pair, which is my Ireland key pair.pem, ec2-user at, and then paste the public IP address of my new instance. And there we are. So it's created our instance, it's opened up the port for SSH, and it's also associated that SSH key with our new instance as well. So that is CloudFormation. You can see that it's really, really simple to use. It's really, really easy. And if we go back to our console, we can actually get CloudFormation to delete that whole stack as well. So if we come back to the console, I'm going to go back to Services, CloudFormation, Actions, and Delete Stack. Yes, delete, and it should delete the whole lot for you. And there's one other thing that I want to show you. If you come down to S3, you'll see that CloudFormation, it actually creates a bucket here with your CloudFormation templates in. And so located in here, if you make it public, you can actually download your CloudFormation template there. So when you upload a template into CloudFormation, it actually stores it in an S3 bucket. And once CloudFormation has successfully deleted all your resources, you'll be able to delete this bucket as well. But you're going to struggle to delete it before CloudFormation has finished deleting all your resources because there's a dependency on this bucket. So that is really everything you should need to know for the exam for CloudFormation. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you. Hello Cloud Gurus, and welcome to this lecture. And this is a really quick theory lecture all about Elastic Beanstalk. So let's get started. So what is Elastic Beanstalk? Well, it's a service for deploying and scaling web applications. And these are applications developed in many popular languages, so Java, .NET, PHP, Node.js, Python, Ruby, Go, and Docker. So they're all supported. And you can deploy these applications onto widely used application server platforms, so platforms like Tomcat, Nginx, Passenger, and IIS. So this means that users can really focus on writing their code, and they don't need to worry about any of the underlying infrastructure needed to run the application. So it means that you don't need to administer Tomcat, Nginx, etc. And you don't need to worry about installing Java, .NET, and all of the other underlying supporting elements needed to run your application. So once you have your code ready, you upload it, and Elastic Beanstalk will handle the deployment, capacity provisioning, load balancing, auto-scaling, and application health as well. And you retain full control of the underlying AWS resources that are powering your application, and you only pay for the resources required to store and run your applications. So for example, any EC2 instances, load balancers, etc., and any S3 buckets used to store your code or store your application data. So the benefits are that it's the fastest and simplest way to deploy your application in AWS. It automatically scales your application up and down. You can select the EC2 instance type which is optimal for your application, and you have a choice either to retain full administrative control over the resources powering your application, or you can have Elastic Beanstalk do it all for you. So it takes away a lot of the heavy lifting associated with running applications in the cloud. It also does manage platform updates, so it will automatically apply updates to your operating system, your Java version, PHP, Node.js, etc. So you don't need to worry about any of that. You can also monitor and manage application health via an Elastic Beanstalk dashboard. And it's integrated with CloudWatch and X-Ray. So CloudWatch for metrics and X-Ray for performance data. So you can view all your performance data and metrics as well from within the Elastic Beanstalk console. So what are our exam tips for Elastic Beanstalk? Remember, it allows you to deploy and scale your web applications, including the web application server platform like Tomcat and Nginx, IIS, etc. It supports widely used programming technologies, so Java, PHP, Python, Ruby, Docker, Go, .NET, Node.js, etc. And it supports application server platforms like Tomcat, Passenger, Puma, IIS. It provisions all of the underlying resources for you, so you don't need to worry about that. And it can fully manage the EC2 instances, or you can take fully administrative control yourself. And it also manages the updates, monitoring, metrics and health checks, and that is all included. So that is Elastic Beanstalk. But the best way to learn about it is really to get your hands dirty and start using it. And that's exactly what we're going to do next in the next lecture. So if you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you. Hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. And this lecture is going to be an Elastic Beanstalk lab. And it's a really quick lecture just to show you how to use Elastic Beanstalk. It's really easy, and it will show you also the differences between Elastic Beanstalk and CloudFormation. So please join me in the AWS console and we'll get started. So here I am in the AWS console, and you'll find Elastic Beanstalk. It's under Compute, and it's really a way of running and managing your web applications without really having to worry too much about the underlying compute. So it handles all of that for you. So let's just click on Elastic Beanstalk. And you should see this splash screen if you've never used Elastic Beanstalk before. So click on Get Started. And we're going to create our first web application. So first of all, we need to give it an application name. So I'm just going to call it My Web App. We need to choose a platform. So the platform for this application is going to be PHP. And I'm going to give you some PHP code which you can use for this lab, and you'll find it in the resources section. Under application code, we're going to select upload your code. So we have to upload a source bundle from our computer, or we can copy one from S3 as well, but we're going to upload a zip file. So click on choose file, and my file is called index.zip, and you will find that in the resources section. Click on upload and then click on create application. So it's basically going to create an environment for us, a PHP environment. We've uploaded some PHP code, and as soon as Elastic Beanstalk has done that, has completed creating our environment, we should be able to view our PHP application using a URL which Elastic Beanstalk will provide for us. So it does take a few minutes, and I'm just going to pause the video now and come back when it has completed. And I think normally it takes maybe about 2 or 3 minutes. And if that was successful, you should see a nice big green tick like this, and you should see health as OK. And then on the right hand side, you get an overview of the configuration, and we're running PHP 7.2 on a 64-bit Amazon Linux 2 AMI. You'll get a high-level view of the recent events. So that is just our main dashboard. You can also take a look at the configuration, and you get a configuration overview dashboard here telling you what instances. So it's launched a T2 micro. There's our AMI image ID, security groups, etc. And it's managed all of the security groups for you to enable you, because it knows it's a PHP and it's a web application. So it's created a security group to enable the web access as well. So it's just really done all of this stuff for us. You can take a look at the health dashboard as well, and this will just give us an overall health overview of anything that's happening within our application. You can also look at monitoring, and this will give you the CloudWatch monitoring as well. And events, again, it will just let us know all of these different events that have happened on the application as well. And as it is a web application, it also gives you this URL. So this is the URL to use if you want to access your application over the internet. So we can just click on that link. I'm going to open it in a new tab. And here is our little web page provisioned using Elastic Beanstalk. So that is Elastic Beanstalk. It's really, really easy to use, and as you can see, all you need to worry about is uploading your code, and Elastic Beanstalk will really do the rest for you. And if you want to go back into Elastic Beanstalk, back into your application, you can actually delete it by just selecting Delete Application here, and then it will go ahead and delete those resources for you. So as you can see, Elastic Beanstalk, it's completely different to CloudFormation. It's only for web servers and application servers. You can't use it to configure all the different AWS resources. It's only for uploading your application code and having Elastic Beanstalk provision an underlying environment on which to run your applications. So it's not as configurable as CloudFormation. And of course, if you're building out a whole stack of different applications, databases, S3 bucket, SNS or SQS, etc., and you're building out loads of different types of AWS resource, CloudFormation is the one to use in that circumstance. However, if all you need is a platform to run your application code and you don't want to worry about the infrastructure, well, Elastic Beanstalk is a great choice for that situation. So that is the end of this lecture. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you. Hello Cloud Gurus, and welcome to this lecture. And this lecture is all about AWS OpsWorks, and it's a really quick lecture, so it's only going to be just a couple of minutes. So let's get started. So what is OpsWorks? Well, it's a service which allows you to automate your server configuration using either Puppet or Chef. And it uses managed instances of either Puppet or Chef. So that means you don't need to configure your own Puppet or Chef environment. It enables configuration management for your operating systems and applications. So it allows you to automate your server config completely using code. And finally, it works with existing Chef and Puppet code. So if you're already using Chef and Puppet in your environment, it's very easy to integrate with OpsWorks. So if you haven't heard of Puppet or Chef, they are two of the most popular and widely used configuration management tools out there. And because they allow you to automate the configuration, it makes it really, really easy to maintain consistency across your estate. Now, both Puppet and Chef, they can both be used with either Linux and Windows. And the kind of things that you might want to automate, that you might want to standardize, are things like any local service accounts that you have on your system. So for example, if you have any accounts on your system associated with your application, and those are local accounts, then you might want to standardize across your estate using Puppet or Chef to make sure that those accounts are applied consistently across all your systems. And the other things that you could automate, for example, is you could automate any scheduled tasks. So on Linux, any cron jobs, or also things like your NTP configuration or any of your application configuration as well. And that is really all you need to know about OpsWorks. So for the exam, you just really need to remember that OpsWorks allows you to automate your server configuration using managed instances of Puppet or Chef. It's a fully managed service, so you don't need to configure and operate your own configuration management infrastructure. And just remember, if you have a requirement to manage EC2 and on-premises systems using either Puppet or Chef, then OpsWorks is the tool to use. So that's everything that you need to know about OpsWorks for the exam. You don't really need to know in great detail how it works. You don't really need to know how to set it up. The main thing to remember is that it's the tool that you use. If you need to use Puppet or Chef, then OpsWorks is the one. So that's the end of this lecture. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you. Hello Cloud Gurus, and welcome to this lecture. And this lecture is a summary of the automation section. So let's get started. Remember, for the exam, CloudFormation allows you to manage, configure and provision AWS infrastructure as code. And you can create a CloudFormation template using either YAML or JSON, and both of those are supported. Remember the main sections in the CloudFormation template. So there's parameters, which allows you to input custom values. And remember, in the lab, we use the parameters section to input the SSH key that we wanted to be associated with our EC2 instance. Conditions are used, for example, to provision resources based on environment. So you can set up an environment parameter and use the conditions section of your template to provision a certain set of resources based on that environment parameter. So that's just one example of how you can use conditions. Resources, that is the only mandatory section of the CloudFormation template. And it's the resources section which defines the AWS resources to create. And remember, every other part of the CloudFormation template is completely optional. Mappings can be used to create custom mappings. For example, you can create a mapping between a region and AMI. So you can use that to determine which AMI to use for which region. And transforms, and these are used to reference resources that are located in S3. So any files located in S3 that you want your CloudFormation template to reference. And that could be, for example, Lambda code, or it could also be reusable snippets of CloudFormation code. And if the CloudFormation deployment fails in any way, so if any element of the deployment fails, then remember the default behavior is for CloudFormation to roll the whole thing back. So CloudFormation will delete the entire stack, including any resources that were actually successfully deployed as part of that job. Now you can disable deletion on failure by using the radio button in the console, and we saw that in the CloudFormation lab. Or if you happen to be using the API instead, you can set disable rollback to true, or you can also use the ---- disable rollback flag at the command line as well. And remember, disabling rollback is particularly useful for troubleshooting a CloudFormation deployment that has gone wrong. So that's the circumstance when you would want to use that disable rollback feature. Moving on to Elastic Beanstalk. Remember, Elastic Beanstalk deploys and scales your web applications, including the Web Application Server platform where required. And it supports widely used programming technologies like Java, PHP, Python, Ruby, Go, Docker, .NET, and Node.js, etc. And remember, in the lab, we used Elastic Beanstalk to deploy a really simple PHP application. And it supports application server platforms like Tomcat, Passenger, Puma, and IIS. So it can also deploy all of that for you as well. It provisions all of the underlying resources for you, so everything needed to support and run your application. And Elastic Beanstalk can fully manage the EC2 instances for you, or you can take full administrative control of them yourself. And it also manages all updates, monitoring, metrics, and health checks, and that is all included, and you can view it all from the Elastic Beanstalk console. So that is the end of this section of the course. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.